Back in the fall of 2017, I paid a visit to the Toronto Zoo. My main goal while there was to check out the baby pandas that were born in the time since I last visited. Given the pandas were leaving soon, this was basically my last chance to see them. But while also there, I took this photo, which was part of my second goal while at the zoo. While at first glance, it may look like a footbridge, it's in actuality an abandoned, elevated guideway. This guideway stretches around the various sections of the Canadian domain of the zoo and rests relatively overgrown and out of sight. In reality, it's all that remains today of a rather interesting and somewhat forgotten about system from back when the zoo had only just opened. In this video, I'll be telling you the story behind the Toronto Zoo Domain Ride. What it was, why it no longer is operational, and the possible, albeit unusual and maybe unlikely chance that it may just one day return, with a system that would bring it into the 21st century.
I wanna go to the zoo. Spend my time with some friends of mine, see what an elephant do.
In August of 1974, the then known as Metropolitan Toronto Zoo opened to the public. It replaced the much older Riverdale Zoo, which was later turned into an urban farm that is still around to this day. Larger in size and with better viewing experiences for guests and habitats for animals, the zoo was an instant hit and still remains one of the largest and busiest in the world. 2 years later, in 1976, the Toronto Zoo Domain Ride opened to customers. Also known as the Canadian Domain Ride or Toronto Zoo Monorail, its purpose as referred to in the name was to transport zoogoers around the various domains and habitats of the zoo, mainly the Canadian domain. The ride operated on a one-way overhead concrete guideway for a total distance of 5.6 kilometers. The rolling stock consisted of 24 specially designed trains. The vehicles were originally developed by the Dashaveyor company as a system to move around cargo. They were designed to operate autonomously and could be controlled from a single central operating station. One version of the system was originally installed in the White Pine Mine in Michigan from 1976 to 1972. However, it was deemed to be a failure. In the late 1960s, the Bendix Corporation purchased the rights of the system from Dashaveyor as a basis for their own automated guideway transit system. This was during the so-called heyday of urban transport research. Bendix took the system and attached a larger passenger body in place of the cargo system, with the cars running on rubber tires instead of steel wheels. Given this, the trains would run on a guideway rather than rails. Power was then provided by a side rail on the right side of the vehicle, with passengers being able to board and disembark from the left side. Given this fact, the system isn't really a monorail in the traditional sense, and shared technology more closely with a rubber-tired metro system. The monorail name is therefore misleading and more so just urban slang and the popularized name. Kinda like how Dan Cooper is the real alias used by the guy from Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305. But due to a miscommunication by the media, DB Cooper is the more popularized and more commonly used name, despite not sharing really any association to the man. The vehicle body was also extended to allow it to hold 31 passengers. An early version of the vehicle even appeared in the November 1971 edition of Popular Science, as part of a story on personal rapid transit. Each vehicle had 3 doors. Given the seating arrangement, it was not possible to walk the full length of the vehicle, nor were there any areas to stand in them. They operated in an either 2 or 4 car configuration. Bendix attempted on various occasions to sell the AGT system. The earliest attempt was to have it installed at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. The project though was over the budget the airport had, and was thus never installed. They even had it on display at the 1972 US International Transportation Exposition. And that brings us back to the Toronto Zoo. Given the size of the zoo, walking was not a feasible option in many areas, so the zoo wanted a system to allow visitors to get to explore more of it than what walking would allow. They were interested in Bendix's technology and, more so, the Ontario government was planning a bigger AGT-type system, which they felt the Toronto Zoo could serve as an excellent prototype and proof of concept for. After another bid by Boeing didn't work out, Bendix got the project. For the zoo, the system was a lot simpler than what Bendix had developed. Given the slower speeds and longer schedule of 10 minutes between the trains, the automated system was not needed. The cars were modified with a cabin in the front for an operator to be in. This operator would also double as a tour guide who would give visitors talks about the various domains and animals that would be seen along the route. Alongside the 5 kilometers of Guideway, a maintenance and storage depot on the north end of the zoo and 3 stations were constructed. There was the main station at the entrance of the zoo, Weston Station at the southwestern corner of the zoo, and the America Station at the north end. The trains also had a set of secondary controls in the last car to allow them to reverse into the storage depot at the end of the day. Operating in a clockwise direction, fares for the ride were separate to the zoo admission and were collected only at the main station. Therefore, you could board the train for free at the other 2 stations, though you were required to get off at the main station, so it limited how much of it you could ride for free. Depending on how busy the day was, there would either be 2 or 4 car configuration trains in operation. Although at first there was controversy around it, given the system cost $14 million to build, while the whole zoo cost $26 million, the CDR was an instant hit. It was a must-visit attraction for zoo visitors, and a defining aspect for many generations of Ontario citizens. Everyone wanted to ride the shiny new quote-unquote monorail at the shiny new zoo.
Mono means one, and rail means rail.
Although capable of reaching speeds up to 30 kilometers an hour, the trains would more often travel at a mere 8 kilometers to allow visitors to view the roaming zoo animals at various attractions. In fact, the CDR was the only way visitors could view animals like the white-tailed deer, moose, wolf sanctuary, and various other animals that were located in remote and isolated areas of the zoo, not reachable by footpaths. Alongside that, in the early years, the CDR also had a sort of Where's Waldo type game for riders to take part in. At the time, the zoo's mascot was a creature by the name of Littlefoot. He was modeled after the mythical Bigfoot, though you'd be forgiven for thinking that he looks more like Chewbacca from Star Wars. The idea was that a guy dressed in a Littlefoot costume would hide in the various remote forests the ride passed through, and people in the cars would try to spot him. While a fun idea in concept, in practice, the gimmick frightened a lot of children, and it was eventually phased out. Despite that minor event, the domain ride saw relative success and remained a staple part of the zoo experience. It all appeared to be going well, but that wasn't to last. Although the CDR was popular, behind the scenes, it was not in the best shape towards the end. Funding was limited, and various cutbacks to the zoo budget and more seriously began to take their toll on the system. Things soon reached a tipping point in 1991. During the busy March break season that year, a train crashed into the rear of a second one stopped between stations. 9 people were injured. The 1991 incident wasn't incredibly reported about at the time and was somewhat forgotten about after a while. But it did serve as a warning that the CDR was in poor shape and needed major work done on it. That December, the zoo's board of directors warned that the braking and propulsion systems of the vehicles needed serious repairs in order to prevent a similar accident from occurring again. A report submitted that month to the board warned that the CDR would fail on a regular basis if repairs were not made, and that it could soon result in more people being injured. Whatever decisions or repairs that were made to the trains, though, sadly weren't enough, as 3 years later, lightning struck again. On July 11th, 1994, a CDR train began departing Weston Station. As this was during the busy summer season, the train was packed. At around 3:15 p.m., as the train reached the top of a hill that it was ascending after departing the station, the vehicle lost power and began rolling back down the hill, reaching a maximum speed of 40 kilometers an hour. As it began rolling back down the hill and towards Weston Station, another train had just pulled into it. While normally they operated on a headway of 15 to 20 minutes, the larger number of visitors to the zoo that day meant they were operating more frequently. The stationary train's operator, 24-year-old Susan Glennon, saw the other train rolling back down the hill and quickly asked passengers to disembark. She would later be hailed a hero given her choice to evacuate the train rather than panic or stay silent, saved many lives that day. The train crashed into the stationary one at full speed, telescoping into it. One survivor on the trains that lost power said that they had feared the train would fly straight off the Guideway when going down one of the corners at the speeds it did. Others said it was like a roller coaster. Despite the devastating crash, no one was killed. Rescuers said that it was a miracle that was the case. Even so, 27 people were injured. These ranged from broken bones to whiplash. At first, a news report put blame for the crash on the driver of the train that rolled back, citing that it was driven by a summer student, and so their inexperience was why it rolled back. The driver was Eric Woost, who had sustained whiplash injuries. However, having summer students drive the trains was a common practice, and once the true cause was determined, it became clear that even had an experienced driver been at the controls, the crash would have still occurred given the failure of the brakes to stop the train from rolling back. The resulting fallout from the accident brought the 1991 accident and warnings about the system's declining condition back into the spotlight, and brought the whole safety of the CDR system into question. The zoo union president at the time blamed cutbacks to the zoo's budget and privatization threats for why the CDR was allowed to deteriorate so badly. But regardless of it all, the fact of the matter was that the system had failed. It was allowed to decline to the point where lives were nearly lost because of it. At a trial in which the zoo pleaded not guilty, but presented no evidence to prove it, they were fined $43,000 for violating the Ontario Occupational Health and Safety Act. While not directly at fault, the court indicated that the driver was inadequately trained for dealing with the unusual situation that had developed the day of the accident. The domain ride never recovered from the 1994 accident. The zoo determined that overhauling the system was too expensive, and therefore, it never ran again. It was replaced by the tractor-driven Zoomobile, which had already been running since the 1980s. That said, it never attracted the same level of excitement and enthusiasm as the CDR did. The domain ride was scrapped over the next several years. While the trains were all scrapped, as well as the electrical rails removed and portions of the Guideway torn down, a good majority of the Guideway still remains around the zoo, likely due to conservation bylaws of the area, and are now overgrown and quietly deteriorating. The 3 stations are also still around. The main station at the entrance of the zoo was repurposed and now serves as a cafe and the main station for the Zoomobile ride. The bathrooms at Weston Station remain open, and the platform can still be seen behind the chain barrier. The America Station meanwhile stands behind closed doors, crumbling away.
This is all that's left of one of the crappiest trains ever built.
The Zoomobile now more or less handles all the work that the CDR once did, visiting the domains served by it, and also other ones such as the Africa domain. And while the CDR is now but a distant memory, there are plans to bring it back in a new form. In 2016, the Toronto Zoo received an unsolicited proposal from an Edmonton-based consortium called Magnavate. Comprised of companies such as Lockheed Martin and the Canadian-based mobility technology company Magna International, they proposed to install a demonstration and fully functional magnetic levitation train ride at the zoo, utilizing the old guideways of the CDR. While I will not go into too much detail on the type of train that it is, given there are way better videos on YouTube about it, a magnetic levitation or maglev train is a system in which a train glides above a guideway with magnetic repulsion. There are various examples of maglev trains around the world, with some of the more well-known systems being in China. Magnavate's proposal was very interesting. Their 4-stop system would allow the existing stations to be reactivated, with the construction of a new viewing stopover and replacement guideways for the sections that were torn down in the 90s. Their train designs are modern, and are also powered by solar panels mounted on both the stations and along the one-way route. They propose several benefits for both themselves and the zoo. For Magnavate, the Zoo Maglev would be a proof of concept for their technology, and a testing ground for future ideas. Alongside the existing infrastructure in place at the zoo, it would cost less for it to be installed, and the success of it could see them getting more possible customers to buy their system. For the zoo, the maglev would provide visitors with a new ride and a way to explore the zoo. It would also be a good PR and marketing tool, given this would be the first commercially operated maglev system in North America. It would also allow for expansion of the zoo and increase revenue as well as many other benefits. To add a cherry on the cake, Magnavate's proposal stated that they would pay the $25 million price tag to build it themselves, at no cost to the zoo, and operate it for 5 years, splitting the profits. For the zoo, the deal was basically as good as it gets. Personally, while the idea is interesting, I'm not too big a fan of the train design, and the proposed price for riding the maglev would be separate from the zoo admission, and to me it's pretty steep, though it may decrease over time. In 2018, the zoo board unanimously voted to move forward with the plans. The decision, however, made it so that Magnavate would operate the system for 15 years rather than 5. But just because the zoo approved it, doesn't mean construction has begun. Magnavate now has to uphold their promise that this will not cost the zoo or the taxpayer anything, and secure the funding to construct the system and permission from the city. Based on Magnavate's own estimates, it was predicted that the project would take 4 years to complete. Media reports at the time said the system could be open as early as 2022. However, as of 2021, now less than a year before the proposed opening, there hasn't been much discussion or updates on the project or its status. Personally, I have my doubts that the system will be open by 2022. And by this point, many people have their doubts about it ever opening at all. The whole project seems to be more like a snake oil deal, and sounding too good to be true on many occasions. And they're not wrong to think that, given the very minimal amount of progress that has been made on it and the vague updates from Magnavate. It plays out almost like the Simpsons monorail episode, to be honest. Transit activist and commentator Steve Monroe explained it pretty well in a thread back in 2018. He made points about how barely known as a company Magnavate is, how there were no alternate plans offered, how the proposed cost just doesn't add up, and how it wouldn't make sense to build a maglev on a low-speed and curvy route like that of the domain ride to begin with. Going on Magnavate's Twitter, it's even weirder. Their last tweet was from 2020, and barely have they said anything on it either, mainly retweeting other things. And when asked about what the delay on the project was, they made claims like they were doing environmental assessments to receive approval to begin work, and that trees and bushes were in the way of the guideways. There's been no update on working prototypes, or any new updates from them in general in almost 2 years. It's really safe to say from all that we know at this point that this is a very shady proposal, and if work ever begins on it, that'll be a miracle. Sadly, sometimes things are just too good to be true. and this very likely is one of them. When the Toronto Zoo domain ride opened in 1976, it was something to behold. It seemed like the future. It was a showcase of a new technology, and it looked like it was the start of a new age for transportation. But as the years passed, the promising new ideas that came forth with the CDR faded away like the decade it was born in. Bendix never found any more customers for their system beyond the Zoo prototype. They would eventually pull out of the AGT market in 1975, a year before the Zoo ride even opened, never selling it to anyone else. The concept of AGTs does still live on though, in places like airports, and small and large transit systems around the world, and more. And while Magnavate's proposal is not one that I have much faith in, given all, or should I say what little information there is out there, I do hope that one day a CDR-like train returns to the Toronto Zoo. For those who rode it during the time it ran, it was a staple experience of visiting the place. And it's something that new generations should get to experience too. For the Toronto Zoo, a return of such a system could help them greatly, and maybe give them much needed PR and lead to increased visitorship. While it may not have been perfect, the Toronto Zoo domain ride did give many the experience of a lifetime. Hopefully one day a new system like that can be built, and make people want to once again say, I want to go to the zoo. This has been a TTM Productions video, and thank you for watching.
I wanna go to the zoo. Spend my time with some friends of mine. See what an elephant do. Say hello to a polar bear. Find me a kangaroo. I wanna go to the zoo. I wanna go to the zoo with you. Walk hand in hand through animal land and laugh with a grinning baboon. A hippopotamus and the two of us under a sky of blue.